So Michael Schur of the Young Turks went to a Trump rally and he did a whole bunch of interviews with MAGA supporters. And he actually managed to find, this is amazing, he managed to find a Bernie to Trump supporter in the wild. Now, the reason why that's interesting is that statistically speaking, they're very, very rare. The media tried to play it up like that was just some huge number of people, but it actually wasn't at all. It was like single digits that went from Bernie to Trump. So supported Bernie in the primary and then supported Trump in the general election. So Shor's going to ask him some questions here, and there's a lot to react to. Let's listen.
I caucused for Bernie, and then when he got taken out, I went to Trump. And so,
Bernie can't stand Trump.
No, that's right. But there's a lot of overlap there. It's left-wing populism and right-wing populism.
It's left-wing populism versus right-wing fake populism. Not remotely similar. In fact, if you look at the policy agenda of Bernie Sanders, the voting record of Bernie Sanders, and compare it to the policy agenda and voting record of Donald Trump, you could not find two people more different. Full stop.
I think there's a big realignment happening.
I think he's probably right about the realignment, which we'll talk about in just a moment. But you heard from a Trump supporter in South Dakota. We sent Michael Schur over to South Dakota to speak to Trump supporters at a rally. And as you can tell from the gentleman's statements, he was a person who caucused for Bernie Sanders back in 2016. And when Bernie did not win the Democratic primary for that election cycle, he decided to vote for Trump instead and has been a supporter of Donald Trump's ever since. Here's more on why he supports Donald Trump.
You caucus for Bernie Sanders, for Senator Sanders in Minnesota. And if he were the nominee now running against Donald Trump, who would you vote for?
I'd vote for Trump still, yeah.
So he says he was a Bernie supporter, then he flipped to Trump. And now if we had an election of Bernie versus Trump, he would vote for Trump. Did I hear that properly? Let me hear it again.
You caucus for Bernie Sanders, for Senator Sanders in Minnesota. And if he were the nominee now running against Donald Trump, who would you vote for?
I'd vote for Trump still, yeah. I probably, I don't know, back in those days, Bernie was a lot more of like an outsider and going against his party. But I think that, I think he folded. And that was an election where you had Bernie going up against the establishment of his party and Trump going up against the establishment of his party. And Trump carried that out. Bernie folded like a wet rag. And then he did it again in 2020. He let him roll him again. So, no doubt in my mind, it would be Trump, 100%.
Look, I want to be kind here, but it's kind of difficult. This is just brainworms. This is just anti-establishment brainworms. This is, I vote based on vibes. That's what this is. So in other words, totally detached and divorced from policy. The only way you can go from Bernie to Trump, and then also when asked if it's Bernie versus Trump directly now, who would you support? And you say Trump. Then it was always just vibes for you. Because the thing that seems clear is, hey, I liked how tough Bernie talked against the Democratic Party, and I liked how tough Trump talked about the Republican Party. And so, it's the fact that they're, taking it to the man and standing up against the establishment that I like. Okay, but what about the content of how they're doing that? What about the actual policy agenda at the core of what both of them are saying, respectively? If you don't understand and realize that these are diametrically opposed ideologies, then it's a total admission that you're only going based off vibes. Hey, I like the vibes of a fighter, and I thought Bernie was a fighter, but Trump is a fighter, and Trump actually follows through, and so I'm going to go with him. Okay, then look, you were never really about what the Bernie policy agenda was about. Now, by the way, on the idea of a realignment, here's the reality about it. It's a messy, complex reality. The reality is, among the Republican base, you can find a number of issues where they actually agree with the Democratic base. Okay, so in other words, if you look at things like the minimum wage, 60% of Florida voters voted for an increase in the minimum wage. At the same time, they voted for Trump, right? So there's a lot of crossover between Democratic voters and Republican voters on the minimum wage. There's a lot of crossover on something like paid family leave. There's even now crossover on stuff like unions. So is there a quote-unquote realignment happening among the voting bases? You could say yes, but I'm more inclined to say there was always kind of agreement on those things against the libertarian-style economics and in favor of populist economics. So among the base of Republicans, yes, there are many issues where you can find common agreement. Here's where there is not a realignment, not even close. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Among the Republican politicians, and clearly this guy supports the main Republican politician, Donald Trump, ain't no realignment coming. Not now, not anywhere in the near future, because the Republican Party, the Republican politicians are colossally elitist, and they're 100 times more elitist and corrupt than the Democrats. So he brings up Trump like he's an anti-establishment crusader. Well, let's look at Trump's record. First of all, we can just bring up the obvious. 91 criminal charges against him because he tried to defraud the United States and overturn the last election using their own words, fraudulent electors in an illegal vote counting scheme to try to keep him in office. So just right off the bat, against the peaceful transfer of power seems like a little bit of a red flag for me. He also said publicly, I'd like to suspend the Constitution to get my ass back in power. Now, would this guy categorize that as like it's anti-establishment? Sure, I guess it is anti-establishment. Sure, I'll give that to you. But it is a bad kind of anti-establishment. It is a stupid kind of anti-establishment. It is an authoritarian kind of anti-establishment. So if that's the kind you support, by all means, God bless. But this is a guy who destroyed the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, killed the regulation that we had and court cases that we had into the predatory payday loan industry. So he sided with the loan sharks. He cut taxes for the rich. He increased drone strikes by 432%. He assassinated a top Iranian commander who was fighting ISIS in the field, nearly sparking World War III. He tried to coup Venezuela. He ripped up the Iran agreement. He pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. He says now publicly, repeatedly, part of his new immigration plan is, I want to do ideological screening and ban socialists and communists. And by the way, just so you know, that would definitely include like mild social democrats and center-left people, because they call everybody they don't like, everybody they slightly disagree with, is a socialist or a communist to them. He also wants to expand the Muslim ban if he were to get another term. He's repeatedly said he wants war with Mexico to go against the drug cartels. He wants to designate them as terrorists and send drones or fighter jets or even boots on the ground to fight them. As I've told you guys 1,000 times, Trump ran as the anti-outsourcing guy, but under his watch, there was a net outsourcing of 200,000 manufacturing jobs. At the same time, under the Biden administration, there's 800,000 jobs coming back. So look, I don't know how else to say it, but like, if you are a Bernie to Trump voter, you're purely vibes-based. You couldn't care even the slightest about policy. Because if you agree with Bernie's policies, right, well then Joe Biden, despite all of his flaws, and he has many that we've gone through a million times, certainly this NLRB ruling is right in alignment with Bernie Sanders. This is definitely something Bernie Sanders supports. Basically, you automatically recognize a union if the boss tries to union bust. That's a game changer. You know what else is a game changer? Changing the overtime rules. It used to be about $33,000 a year or less. If you make that, you can get overtime pay. They kicked it up to $55,000 a year. The list goes on and on. Trump talked about pulling out of Afghanistan. Biden actually pulled out of Afghanistan. Biden reduced the drone war by over 90%. So again, if policy is what you actually care about, to go from Bernie to Trump, the only thing I can take away from that is you actually don't care about policy. You're all about vibes. Whoever's going to posture as being most anti-establishment, regardless of the substance of it, I'm just going to support them. Basically, I like loud people who are aggressive against their own party structure. If that's your single issue, then you really are the kind of person who just says, I just want to fuck shit up as much as possible and tear it down. And I don't care how it's rebuilt. I just want to tear it down. So, honestly, kind of embarrassing. Kind of embarrassing. And there's a reason why these people are so few and far between. Because they make no goddamn sense. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.